Hello, my name is Rich Larson, and welcome to the IIBA Certification Chat for January 2019. I'm a co-principal of Watermark Learning and have been around the certification part of business analysis since 2007 when we offered our first class. I was certified early 2007. And Watermark Learning, in case you don't know us, has been in business since 1992, offering training and certification preparation for people in business analysis, project management, agile, and several other disciplines related to that. You're here today for IIBA certifications, and I'm really glad a lot of people signed up this month. Hopefully your resolution is to get yourself certified in 2019, and I'm going to do what I can to help you on that journey. So welcome to people from, say, Christina from Ottawa, Peter Lutz from Atlanta. Your name's very familiar, Peter. We and I have connected over the years, so welcome. Sir Kevin from, let's see, it doesn't say Philadelphia, cold and cloudy there, so hopefully you don't have to go outside for now. So looking for ECBA. I'm going to launch a poll in just 1 second. So even from Calgary, where it's 6 degrees Celsius, sounds cold there too. We have one question. Robin from Atlantic Beach, Florida, which sounds like Jacksonville. Is that correct? My brother lives there. 74 degrees. Oh, and tough duty. Somebody's got to do it, right? CBAP recertification requirements. Excellent. Eric, hello from Springfield, and Kirby from Brooklyn. Welcome, everybody. These sessions are recorded, as I've mentioned, and we'll send an email with a link to the recording, and they're out on our website as well. There are slides bundled in a PDF that are available as a handout. Hopefully you can find those and take them with you. We don't always go through detail by detail. Sometimes I'll refer to them, and depending on the questions you have, that's my main priority today, is to answer your questions, because you can always look at the slides later and then write to us with further questions. Hi, Francis from Abu Dhabi. I'm sure it's warmer there than it is across much of the US. So let's start off. So we have a question from Peter. He says he took an Atlanta IIBA chapter prep course a few years ago to prepare for CBAP 2.0, but never took it. I have to reapply, etc. He knows, but are the professional development hours from that still usable for taking the CBAP exam now? It depends. So let's jump ahead to one of the slides in your handout that you have available to you. As you can see over here, that you have to have 35 hours in the last 4 years. So I would ask you, Peter, has your professional development training been in the last 4 years? So if you could just shoot me back an answer, then we could have a little dialogue here. So yes, excellent, then they'll qualify, no problem. So that's the limitation for that, as well as for CCBA. It's got to be 4 years. There is no time, well, I shouldn't say that. There's none for the AAC, but there is for ECBA, same as CCBA. Okay, so excellent. So Eric is asking, does the spreadsheet on the training plan that you provide need to be updated to BABAC 3? It is updated for BABAC 3. What he is referring to, folks, is that on our website, we have a variety of resources available to you. One is over on certification resources. There's a CBAP application worksheet, and it's useful for both CBAP or CCBA, so either way. So if you go ahead and get that, it is updated to 3.0. I'm not, maybe referring to an old version. We've had them since version 1. So now it's been updated each release. So it is definitely there for that. And it's been made simpler because IIBA has made their application process simpler. So check it out and let me know if you have more questions for it. Peter's saying, is product owner certification training applicable to CBAP, or can it be? My guess is it is not, because product owner is really a different discipline than business analysis. What IIBA has set up is the professional development requirement to make sure that you get business analysis training. And I've seen them reject people for things like Six Sigma. They have declared that that's not business analysis, although there's certainly overlaps, as we all know. And even though maybe business analysts perform product owner duties, that doesn't mean product ownership is a business analysis activity. Does that make sense? So it doesn't mean they won't accept it. I'm just saying you'd be better off using other training for your professional development requirement. And if you have any doubts, write an email to certification@iiba.org. That's certification@iiba.org to be sure. And they should answer your question. Amit is asking, how much score should one get in our Watermark CBAP mock exam so that one can decide to take the actual exam? We suggest that people strive for an 80% rate. We have some tips built into, oops, sorry to make you dizzy, folks, tips built into our handout. And what we're saying here, if your exams are less than 80%, go back and reread the BABAC and or if you get our certification study guide, do more study on that section. And then basically when you're doing simulations, we're suggesting that same threshold to make sure you're ready. People guess that the so-called cut score is 70% to pass your IIBA exams. So that's why we set it one step higher to go for 80% to make sure you're over prepared. We never suggest 100% because in order to get there, you probably end up memorizing our questions and answers, and that's not going to prepare you. So 80% should be enough. It's no guarantee, of course, but that is what we suggest. Nuno, hi Nuno, from Portugal. Welcome, welcome. Glad you could join us. It must be in the evening hours over there. Okay, since BABAC 3 covers Agile, if you have a CCBA, as you do in your case, or a CBAP, is AAC competencies covered or is the certification complementary? Well, first of all, in the CBAP and CCBA, you will be tested on adaptive approaches to projects, and also potentially out of the 50 techniques, several of them are applicable in an Agile environment. So do expect some questions on your basic CBAP and CCBA. IIBA has released the Agile extension and the AAC certification, which is part of that. It's a whole separate set of questions. From what we understand, there are no questions from the BABAC on it, but there are questions, of course, from the extension. So if your question is, are you interested in the AAC? And if you are, you got obviously have to get a hold of the extension and study it thoroughly in order to pass it. So if you have additional questions, or if I did not answer that question, Nuno, please send me back a follow-up. That's always a good way for us to handle it during these sessions. Joel is asking, what happens during an audit and how often does this occur? Well, first of all, I was audited way back when. So during the audit, what they'll do is contact your contacts. So when you submit your application, you will have to supply contacts for the different projects, as well as your references. Now, your references are kind of a pre-audit, so those will not be contacted further because IIBA has already checked with them. But the contacts for each of your projects will be contacted by IIBA to make sure that you actually did work on the project you said you did. Secondly, they will need to see a copy of your high school or college transcript. So make sure you get a PDF version of the transcript. And in my case, I went to a very large university in Minnesota, and I thought with all the bureaucracies there, it'd be easier to go to my high school. So I asked my high school, and they were very happy to oblige to send me a PDF of my high school diploma. So I just used that because you just need your high school. If your university diploma is easy, and if you have a PDF already, well, use that, whatever is easy. And thirdly, you need to get a certificate to prove your professional development training actually took place within those 4 years. So make sure that you line up a PDF copy of your of a certificate from the training to prove that you actually went through it. And that includes a study group. If your study group qualifies for the PD hours, and some do, not all, make sure you get a certificate of completion from your IIBA chapters study group. So those are the main things. So they'll contact your contacts. They'll want to see your schooling diploma and a copy of your PDF for your PD training. Okay. How often does this occur, Joel asks? I don't know. They don't tell us. They don't want us to really know. I'd say, I don't know, 10% of the time. I don't really know. I'm guessing how what their resources are like to do that. So I think you should go into the application assuming you're going to get audited. Murphy's Law will strike like it did for me. So anyway, there you go. Kevin is asking, what are the requirements to maintain the ECBA certification after passing? Let me see about recertification here. For mainly here, you need 60 CDUs for your CCBA and CBAP. From what I understand, that's kind of a gray area for me, whether you need to do that. I don't think you do. I don't think you have to maintain it because it's not a certification. That's the interesting thing about it. It's a certificate. So as such, it doesn't get renewed. Does that make sense? Whereas CCBA, CBAP, and AAC are renewable. They're a credential. ECBA is not a credential. It's just a certificate. Does that answer the question? Okay, next up, and I'm glad to see there are a lot of people on the chat today, so that's very cool. So I'm going to whip through these questions, and if we have to stay after the half hour, if you have questions, I will keep going. So let me know by firing in your questions if you want to stay on, and if you have to leave at the end of the half hour, know that you can access a recording to catch up on anything you might have missed. All right. So Kevin is also asking, is there a continuing education CDU, PDU element? The answer is no. And there is overlap between CBAP and PMP. I've done that over the years. So many of the courses that apply to maintaining my CBAP also count towards maintaining my PMP. So there's overlap on those. Amit is saying he's currently scoring around 63% in the Watermark CBAP simulation exam. He says he's finding it difficult to answer application-based case study. And that's not a surprise because they are the most difficult questions and you have to really be good at that. So my suggestions for tackling those questions based on what you're asking is make sure that you read carefully through the case study, but you might want to try an approach that some people have done, and that is to go read a question and then go back and read through the case study to see where in the case study that question is actually referenced. In other words, because you've got maybe 500, 600, 700 words to pour through, and I don't know if I'm wrong in assuming you may not be a native English speaker, that's a big challenge when you have a large case study to have to read through. Even if you are, they can be tricky. So look for the question first and then go back and read the case study looking for where in that case study the answer is. That's the first thing. The second thing is maybe to jot down some notes as you're going through. You should be provided with a whiteboard. There's not a lot of room to write on those things. So if I were you, if the exam center provides 2 whiteboards, I would take them both. So maybe take down some notes or something that, as you would study for a course, you might write down notes so that you've got something in front of you to be able to compare to. So those are some quick thoughts about what might help you with that. And Joel is saying, can you expand on your comment about that getting 100% on your questions doesn't necessarily mean you'll pass? Okay, what I mean by that is if you practice too much using our questions, you're going to really understand our questions and answers for sure. But the idea is to understand what's in the BABAC. So what I mean by that is that if you understand the BABAC and you get 80% on our questions, you'll probably pass. And the tricky part about that, the thing that's harder to measure, is how much do you know of the BABAC. So I would throw back a question to you, Joel, and anyone else who's similarly interested in this. How many times have you read the BABAC? We always suggest at least once. If you're struggling with understanding it, let me say our study guide, and there is at least one more on the market that people see on Amazon. So whatever study guide you might want to get to help you understand it would be ways to supplement that. Another thing, we sell flashcards to help people with terminology. If you're stumbling over the difference, say, between verify requirements and validate requirements, things like that, if they're tripping you up, then maybe you want to do that. Or if you're struggling with maybe some of the details, we have study tables to help you with that. So in other words, there are adjunct study tools that can help you comprehend the BABAC. And if that's not an issue, well, then some people are able to read the BABAC, do some practice questions, and go in and pass. So if you're in that camp that can absorb stuff simply by reading, then you don't need those things. So there are a variety of learning styles that we try to address with our products, as well as recognizing that not everybody needs what we offer. And so Joel, please shoot me back a follow-up if that is not what you're asking, or if you need more. So Nuno, it's 5 p.m. in Portugal. That's not too bad. Okay, so Joel, or Nuno says he knows the AAC is based on the Agile extension. Good. Questions are not the same. Great. Since you have a CCBA, he's wondering if it is worth getting certified in AAC. Okay, that makes more sense. I think so, depending on, are you working in an Agile environment or do you want to? If the answer to either of those is yes, I think it's worth it. In what situations, in your opinion, may be worth having both certifications? Well, do you find yourself working in adaptive type projects like using Scrum or any other version of Agile for that matter? And increasingly, people are finding themselves in those situations, or maybe you are pigeonholed because you are, what that means, you're stuck in a rut because you only know, say, a waterfall approach to projects. It would be a way to demonstrate, as any certification would do, that you are committed to learning and to self-improvement and so forth. I think a certification has a tremendous value to you and to your employer in that regard. Or potential employers. So when you're applying for a job, if somebody says, well, what's that certification? You can then start talking about what AAC is and what it measures. So I do think that it's worthwhile. And of course, I'm a believer in certifications. So it wouldn't, anybody who knows me would not be surprised at me saying that. Kevin is saying, is ECBA a lifetime certificate? I believe so. I've not seen anything to the contrary. I think he got his question answered earlier by something else I said. So Amit says, how should one remember the techniques pertaining to each task of the knowledge areas? That is a difficult thing, I think. First of all, if your question is trying to memorize which techniques apply to which knowledge areas, I don't think that that's worth it. I think a general understanding of the techniques is hard enough. And so if you get a question, you're able to understand some of the more obscure techniques, like what is a sequence diagram, or a state transition diagram, for instance. Some of those things that you may not run across every day on the job, if you know what those techniques are, you might know when they might be applied. I think that's the approach I would take, because there are 50 techniques. That's a lot to have to deal with. And as a result, it tends to be enough for people's brains to try to absorb those, much less understanding which techniques apply to each knowledge area. So I'm assuming that is what your question is. Now, if your question is how do you remember those techniques, that's a whole nother story. I think reading in the BABAC is a very necessary thing. Our study guide talks about each technique and tries to give some examples of each. Well, not tries, and we give examples. In some cases, we have diagrams that apply. And there are other books. One that we recommend to learn about techniques is Carl Wieger's and Joy Beatty's book on requirements. So Carl Wiegers, Wiegers, and Joy Beatty, Beatty, have co-authored, I think it's version 3, don't quote me on that, of what Carl Wiegers started many years ago with the software requirements. There are a lot of techniques in that book. That could be another good adjunct to learning. And that's a good reference on the job, as I think our study guide's a good reference on the job, all these things. So that's something you may want to look at if that's what your emphasis is. Okay, Francis, hello. Can you please shed more light on the ECBA Plus? Is it some sort of extended ECBA? What the ECBA Plus is designed to do is to provide you with the basic ECBA certificate plus additional skill training to go on top of it. We have talked to IIBA extensively about this program, and we have access to the ECBA Plus materials and have decided to wait to see what people out there in the world are interested in. We see it being popular in India amongst consulting companies. That's one market that is designed to serve. We have our own skills-based training though as a company, as do other training vendors. And so we haven't really been super motivated to offer yet another skill-based training that is, distraction or competition or alternative to our own. So if you find a vendor that's offering something like that and that appeals to you, if you want to get to ECBA, which we also have that training, by the way, plus some skills, I think it's something to look at. For me, what we offer, we like our BA Bootcamp certificate as opposed to the ECBA Plus. But again, that's us, and so I don't want to go on too much about our own offerings. And you asked about ECBA Plus, so hopefully I answered that. Nuno said also, and sorry if it is a bit out of scope of the webinar. No, it's okay. I'll tell you if it's out of scope. What's your opinion in getting certified in CBAP and PMI PBA? I think that's very relevant. I get asked that question a lot. First of all, the PMI PBA, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is PMI's BA certification. It is different in focus from CBAP, whereas CBAP focuses primarily on a business analyst role on projects and before and after projects as well. The PBA focuses on the business analysis work, because it could be a business analyst, it could be a project manager, or a hybrid. And so what we recommend, if you are finding yourself doing a combination of BA work and PM work, or some other job families, the PBA is something to very definitely look at. We also like to say that if you're a consultant or a trainer, having both those certifications makes sense. That's what I am. And so I've got both. And there's just a different emphasis in the two. Plus, thirdly, if you already have a PMP, the PBA makes sense to look at because of you're familiar with the PMI family of things, as well as just the practical side of recertifying is easier if you have the both. But that by itself is not enough. I mean, if you do 100% business analysis work, and no project management work per se, we still recommend the CBAP as the certification of interest. So, all right, moving on. Kirby is asking, you were certified in 2013, I assume CBAP maybe, Kirby, and recertified in 2016, so now you're up again. Supposedly, if you had more credits than needed for last year, yes, in the last year of your certification, you can carry them over. I think to account for that, because I've never really done that, because I never trusted that the system's going to work right. And I have usually plenty enough. I think it's the way it's supposed to work is that they're automatically carried over. But that's the part I'm not sure I trust, because their system is a little bit more manual. So maybe what you should do in your recertification is, because it is manual entry in many cases, Kirby, is to indicate that I had X number of carryover PD or CDUs from the last time. It's just reference that as one of the items that you submit. That's what I would do. The other thing you could do, if you're more conservative or cautious on these kind of things like I am, if you don't want to just kind of start from scratch, is to write to them and ask them, how do you do that? What's the current procedure? As you guys know, IIBA is undergoing some big website changes right now. The certification submission is kind of in flux and is changing. So because of that too, I'd recommend that you write to them just to be sure. You don't want them to reject your recertification application simply because they missed something. Okay, Tahani, hi. For CBAP, we need to repeat it and renew it once in a while. Yes, every 3 years, you need to, I don't know if you can see the slide, you need 60 continuing development units. Whoops, go back, Rich, get back here. Every 3 years to maintain your certification. They can come from a variety of sources. You can do some of them through training classes, some of them through chapter meetings and conferences and webinars. You can do other things like reading books, other self-study things like that, and you can also do things using your actual work experience. I think you have to have a minimum of 1,000 hours, but then you can count some of those as PD or CDUs for recertifying. And then you submit a small fee to IIBA, and it's pretty much in line with other certifications. Like IIBA model there is quite closely after PMIs, and others in the industry are quite similar. Robin is asking how many CDUs are in the Watermark prep courses. We provide for CBAP and CCBA 35 hours. For our ECBA course, it's 21 hours. Now, if you use our Anytime Learning versions, you get the same number. So we have a self-paced version of our classes that give you the same number and have all the same materials. So there you have it. Now, Shelby is asking a question. Unfortunately, you had to leave. When taking an exam, do they allow you to do a brain dump right before you take the test? Yeah, when I was referring back to those whiteboards, the reason I want two, I'd use one of them to do your brain dump prior to pressing the start button to go. If you have some time to orient yourself to the system, so that's when I would do the brain dump. For those of you who don't know what that is it's a way to write down some key things that you've memorized as a way to focus your energies and get your brain clear for answering questions. I think its chief benefit is relieving test anxiety. One of our tips is to do a brain dump at the start to relieve that anxiety. And another tip, I bet not everybody follows this, that I suggest is at the top of that whiteboard, write, I'm going to pass my exam. It's just a positive statement of, yes, I'm going to do this. It sounds corny, but I saw a study that tested school children who did that on their exam paper scored significantly higher than students who didn't do that. Now, it's only one study, but to me, it kind of reinforces my intuition that that is a good idea. Kevin says, Watermark currently offers ECBA, but IIBA now launched ECBA Plus, right? Which adds on a practicum hands-on experience. Are there plans to modify the offer going forward? Are you talking about our offering, Kevin? And is there a real world difference between the two? Again, I think the practicum that IIBA is offering is a like a training course that you can take after the ECBA to get this kind of extra plus. It's somewhat confusing to the marketplace, let me say. So the real world difference between the two is that you get the ECBA certificate in both cases. With the plus, you've got more skill-based training to show to whoever that you've had that. Likewise, if you take one of our courses or any other vendors for that matter, you can show a certificate of completion that you took XYZ training. And there's not a huge difference maybe that's not what you're asking, but that's how the approach we're taking and looking at it. Nancy's asking, Can volunteer BA work count towards the hours needed for CBAP and CCBA work experience? Not initially. They count towards recertifying, but not towards the initial certification. You must have actual training, professional development, they call it. We call it BA training. And so things like webinars or IIBA chapter meetings or volunteering work experience do not count. But Dria is saying, I'm taking a boot camp class for the CBAP and I'm part of a study group at work. Great. Ideally, how many hours should be spent studying a week and for how many weeks before taking the exam? This is really, we're saying right out here on top of our study tips, we're saying 100 hours on average total. So it depends on how many hours a week you have to devote to that. So let's say you can spend 2 hours a week max because your work and personal life are so busy. That's going to take, I would say, 50 hours, but that can be compressed if you take a class and if you spend that time in a 1 or 2 week time period, then you could shrink that. If you can spend 5 hours a week, it'll only take you 10 months minus the amount if you have a training class. Badria, does that make sense? So I would use the 100 hours, which would include a prep class. So you, like ours is 35 hours, so that means it's 65 hours divided by how many hours a week you have available to study. So that's the best metric we have. And we came up with 100 hours based on 2 different studies we've done. We did research on successful candidates, and that's the amount they told us that they spent on average to get that. So Nuno, great. Thanks for attending. I'm glad this is useful to you. Joel is saying, roughly how many case study questions are on the CBAP exam? They are suggesting that 1/3 approximately of the exam is case studies, maybe a little more. And do your practice exams allow you to filter for those questions? In our case, no. We don't do that because we want you to get it more of a real world experience. What I'd suggest, if you want to get the maximum, is to do 3 or 4 simulations, and you'll see our variety of case studies mixed in. And we keep adding them. We have 2 more that are ready to be added to the system, which we'll do shortly within January sometime. Excuse me. So I think that your best approach is to do the simulations, Joel, to get all of those. And it's interesting feedback that you said there are many people interested in practicing those specifically. So what we can do is take that as feedback. I'm jotting it down right now. Filter on just the case studies. Okay, so thanks for that feedback. We will definitely consider that. Kirby says, follow up on me. As noted above, I was certified on BABAC 2, not 3. Okay, I advise BAs at my firm on certification. What can I highlight for them that's different from getting certified on 2 versus 3? Well, there are new techniques. Boy, I want to say 16 new techniques. That's one thing to focus on, is look at the different techniques. There are reorganized tasks. For instance, there's no enterprise analysis anymore, but there is a strategy analysis. So there are different emphases there. That's one of the big areas that it's changed. There's still BA planning. Instead of requirements management, there's a requirements lifecycle management, but essentially the tasks are much the same. Likewise for requirements analysis. They've added in a concept of design definition in BABAC 3, which was not in there in version 2. That relies generally on the same techniques, and I think that's worth a little consideration for focusing in on, but not a ton. The BA core concept model is new. I would give that a little bit of mention, but from the feedback we're hearing from successful candidates, there aren't the specific questions like we thought there would be as many. So I would focus on those few things that I just mentioned. Tanaya is saying, I tend to get overwhelmed in the BABAC. We all do, so you're not alone. I have the study guide and flashcards. Would those suffice, or should I really read the BABAC? I think you should really read the BABAC. And what I suggest to people is read a chapter in the BABAC and then go to our study guide and read the same chapter. And it seems redundant, but hopefully it will help you understand what you just read. And I would, because the BABAC is overwhelming, and now 500 some pages. That's, and for our book is too. Now, I think that can seem overwhelming, but hopefully our approach and our writing style makes it more understandable. That's the feedback we get, says it does. So that's what I would do. The other thing too, if you get our online study exam, you can then do practice questions. You can do drills on that chapter that you just read. So as a previous questioner asked about filtering, you can filter the knowledge areas in our study tools. So hopefully that helps. Tahani, from previous experience, actual exam questions are similar to what is in the simulation. Are you asking, are our questions similar to the real exam questions? Well, we try to make them, no, I don't think any of ours are exactly the same. If they were, that would be a violation of our code of conduct. Some are going to be similar because we take the question material right from the BABAC, which is what the real questions are based on. So it's the same source material. So if we are focusing on a given task or a technique or an element or guideline, whatever, we're going to probably be testing close to the same thing. I think trying to memorize our questions is a bad idea. So she goes on to say, I would like to know if memorizing them will end up being a bad idea. I think I would definitely steer clear of that. The intent of our questions is to help you get familiar with the BABAC, number one, and secondly, the style of questions you're likely to get on the exam so that you're not shocked when you go in the exam booth. Plus, we have other little goodies in our tools that we give you explanations of why right and wrong answers are right or wrong. And then we give you the ability to time yourself. That's another reason that sometimes people get test anxiety, is that they're not used to being in the pressure of an exam booth. And so if you haven't taken advantage of the time feature, I would definitely urge you to do that. Go in and do some speed tests, as we sometimes call them. So you can see your rate of answering questions, so you don't end up spending 20 minutes on the very first question, which would really throw off the rest of your time. So hopefully that helps, Tahani. Shankar asks, my CBAP cert is currently suspended status. I think you were on one of my chats before, right? I'm falling short of the 60 CDUs and was not in a position to submit to IIBA by July 18. What are the options for me to get enough CDUs, as I am falling short by 25? Shankar, I think well, we can help because we have a series of training tapas, as we call them, kind of small bites of material that can easily add up to the 25 CDUs that you need. So if you'd like to, we can give you a package deal to get you the 25 that you need to quickly go through the training so you can qualify. So if you would like, please send me a email at richard.larson@watermarklearning.com. That's richard.larson@watermarklearning.com, and I'll put you in touch with one of our training consultants, Shankar, to give you a proposal. That's kind of the best thing. So Amit is saying, my drill pattern questions passing rate was more than 80 for all the knowledge areas, but 3 simulations that I have attempted later, my score is less than 70%. Okay, maybe part of the reason for that is that in the simulations, now your questions get maybe a little more difficult. What we try to do is to populate the simulations with more scenarios and case studies to mimic the real exam. Now, take a look at which knowledge areas that you're falling short on and go back and reread those sections out of the BABAC or any study guides, and perhaps do some more drills on those. The thing is, though, then you get back into simulation, we're going to get you more of the scenarios and case studies. So I think you have to end up back in these simulations and then see what your test score is like. Tahani is asking, what is the CDU? It's called a continuing development unit. A continuing development unit is something that is IIBA's invention, much like a PDU is for PMI, the professional development unit. It is those different categories that I mentioned before, training classes. chapter meetings, conferences, webinars, book reading, experience. And so there are a variety of things that there is a handbook to supply you with those when you get to that point. So for recertifying CBAP, do I just need the 60 CDUs or redo the exam as well? You do not need to take the exam again. Once you take the exam and successfully recertify, you don't have to take it again. Now, Shankar, who's in suspended status, may be forced to take the exam again if we can't get that resolved to get the PDUs for him or her. So you got that 3-year period to accumulate the CDUs, and a spreadsheet helps keep track of that. We have one of those on our website too, you can download to help you keep track of them as well. Joel is asking, are there any calculation type questions on the exam? The answer is yes, but I don't think that they're very complicated, like net present value or ROI. We've not heard any reporting of those kind of things, or heaven forbid, the net present value, which is probably the hardest of all. So be prepared to do some calculations in your exam. Make sure you get a calculator. Maybe there's one built into the interface. It probably is. So ask about that when you check in for your exam. How are you going to do your calculation? But yes, be prepared for some. And we have calculations in our exam questions to help you kind of get used to that sort of thing. Shankar says, I heard you say in this conference that we can utilize 1,000 work hours. How many CDUs would that convert to? I think the limit is about 15, something like that. 15 to 30, somewhere in that neighborhood. And they definitely have different limits on what you can qualify for. Again, the handbook, I don't have that instantly at my fingers, but the handbook would tell you. Kirby says, similar to advising my peers, what sort of foothold does the ECBA have in your opinion? Are people gaining it or employers finding it valuable? Well, okay, the honest truth is it is not gaining the foothold that IIBA thought. Now, more people have the ECBA certificate than have the CCBA. So to that extent, it is faster adoption than, say, the CCBA. But we don't see the same interest level in ECBA as we do for, say, CBAP. I think maybe some of that might be marketing on IIBA's part. They're not really spreading the word well enough, but I think it's a slower adoption than they wanted on that. So it's definitely something to look at. We always encourage people to look at that one. So even though it may be a slow adoption, that doesn't lessen the value, in my opinion. Nancy says, you mentioned 1/3 of the CBAP exam is case study based questions, right? How many of the remaining questions are scenario based? At least another 1/3, with the final third being knowledge or recall. And that's just a rough estimate, Nancy, but thanks for the question. So 1/3 case study, 1/3 scenario, 1/3 recall. Deborah says, while preparing for my CBAP exam, I studied using both the Babak and the Watermark study guide. I used the online practice, but couldn't really see how the online practice helped. Interesting. They're not similar, but what other additional steps am I supposed to take to pass the next exam? Interesting that you said the online practice didn't help. I guess it's a tool that have helped a lot, but it's not for everyone, I guess. The idea is to get used to answering questions, and maybe if you're used to that from, say, having a PMP or other exams, maybe that won't matter. But I think the idea here is to really, we designed it to help you understand the Babak. So when you get a question right or wrong, we provide Babak reference numbers for you to zero in on what part of the Babak the information came from. That way you can read more about it and to give you a greater understanding of what the question is trying to get at, so that you can really understand the Babak better. Does that make sense, Deborah? Anna is saying, how should I study references about use cases and UML to be able to answer the questions? The book I mentioned earlier by Carl Wiegers, whoops, I accidentally deleted the question. So the book I mentioned about Carl Wiegers has information about those kinds of techniques. I think that's a good one. In addition to reading the BABAC, there's some small coverage there. We have some coverage in our study guide, but then a book like Carl Wiegers, hopefully he's paying me his commission checks like he should. No, I'm just kidding. But it's we respect that book a lot and think that can help you with the techniques in particular. So Bhushan is saying, how many questions in total will we get if we subscribe for Watermark Learning Question Bank? We have over 1,200 questions, and you have an unlimited use of the drills and the simulations. And so we pull from the exam bank based on the knowledge areas that you are drilling on, or for the simulations, what we do is we pull the percentage of questions for each knowledge area according to how the IIBA exam blueprint says. 30% from requirements analysis, let's say, or 20% from requirements lifecycle management, et cetera. So you'll get 1,200 questions, a lot of use, and unlimited use during your subscription period. Joel says, you say in your guide that there aren't questions on perspectives. That's true. That continues to hold true. The perspectives are ways to apply business analysis, and it's an adjunct. Interesting, it should have been probably a separate document in my opinion, but they didn't ask me. They tried to cram too much into the BABAC, but oh well, there you have it. So you're not going to get questions on those. Anna's saying, what's the benefit of flashcards? The benefit of flashcards is understanding terminology. Whether you're used to a certain way of doing business analysis in your career, or maybe you've never really had a lot of formal training with, maybe we use terminology that's really more business oriented rather than business analysis oriented. Or maybe your English is not your strong suit. Whatever the reason, it's about terminology and really understanding some concepts that way. The other thing about it too is that we pull the terms in our flashcards from the BABAC, and so it helps you zero in on some of the important concepts. We chose the terms that we thought would help you understand the BABAC the best. So it's another way to kind of force yourself into understanding what those are all about. Nancy's saying, so you mean to say there won't be any questions on the perspectives in the exam? That is correct. Yep. Yeah, for all the exams. Let me go show you the blueprint. Up here, here's the blueprint for the 3 exams. Not the AAC, because that's a kind of a different animal. But here are the percentages that come from the IIBA Blueprint. So you'll see this in your handout. You can see for the 3 different levels where the questions are drawn from. And those are all just knowledge areas and chapters from the BABAC, not counting the perspectives. So Brushan saying, can you please provide a list of books you recommend other than the BABAC? If you could write those names on the screen, then that would be helpful. Okay, let me see about this. Oops. Let me see here. Does that go in your books? Is this helpful? Hopefully you can see what I'm writing. Now the thing is about the books, I think it's called Software Requirements. By Carl Wiegers and Joy Beatty. Of requirements. The name might be a little bit longer. I'd have to check our website to see if we still have a bibliography. I know we've got some and not others. We've listed some books in the past, but those are, this is one that just comes to mind. If you need some more, I'd have to do more research, but that's the one. It's a long book, so I think if you just spend your time studying the BABAC, that book, that's a lot of studying. Plus, if you were to buy our study guide or any of the other study tools that are out there, that's going to be quite a bit. So, Bhushan, does this help? Third edition. Okay, thank you, Peter. Third edition. Thank you. All right. Great. So let's see. Anna saying, should I keep in mind every task's input and outputs, guidelines and techniques? See, that's a big challenge. There's a lot to memorize, and not everybody either can or wants to do that. I think you should be familiar with them without memorizing them. I know that's a kind of a hard distinction. We've created a small product called our study tables to help you get the big picture of those various things. And I know this sounds like an advertisement, but it's a fairly, it's like a $20, $30 some product, so it's not real expensive. And it comes, if you take our training, it comes with our training class. So a tool like that can help you be familiar with it without trying to memorize them all. I'm trying to think of good advice as far as not knowing your learning style. I would have to try to make my best guess, because I think one thing you can do is to do some practice questions and see that memorizing every input and output guideline and element of the different tasks is not necessary, because you're not going to get asked for that. There are only 120 questions on the CBAP exam, and so it's not possible to do that. Now, if you don't understand them at all, and then let's say if you're trying to validate requirements, what's the first thing the BA should know? Well, you would need to know the input to that task. And so that's why I'd say getting an understanding of where that fits and maybe what has to be done in place in order to verify a requirement or validate whatever my example was, that would help you more. I hope that gives you some good advice, because there's a lot. I think the biggest thing people have in certification is, how do I tackle this big body of knowledge and the amount of information I have to try to absorb? You don't want to cram your brain. You're not going to do it. One of our tips is, don't spend time cramming for your exam. A well-rested brain is going to serve you better when you go into the exam booth. And so proper preparation, spending 100 hours is realistic, and that'll give you need to spread that out over time. I think when I took psychology back in college, I learned that rest was the best way to absorb things. So I kind of joked about, I like to rest a lot. So give your mind time to absorb the information. So spend a little bit of time each week, as opposed to trying to cram 20 hours of study into a week. Some people said that they were prepared for their exam because they had took a 2-week vacation or something and wanted to get it done. Well, that's hard to do, to really force that much training in. And I don't think you absorb as much as well. I think that in wrapping this up today, one of the things I can leave with you is that this is a learning experience, and you really, I think, are best off if you then can retain some of that information, and the better way to do that is to spread it out over time. And I think that will conquer your fear, if that is, or your concern about trying to memorize all those things. So the other references were better to study. I'm not quite sure I understand. One of the references you could do is this book I placed here. It's not focused on the CBAP per se, so you may find that it doesn't cover all of the topics. Well, it won't, because it's focused on what it's designed to do. And I do think this is a good way to help understand the techniques. Not all the techniques in the BABAC are in this book, by the way, too. So you're reading the BABAC for sure, and reading a study guide is another way to do that. So I also recommend use Wikipedia when you're struggling with understanding a technique like the business model canvas. Let's say you've never run across that. I'd go to Wikipedia. I use that. It's been around long enough, even from back in my certification back in 2007. It was there. It's even better now. It's been curated and refined enough so that the information about the different techniques is out there. If you look up net present value, unfortunately, that's very scientific looking and kind of intimidating. So some of those things may not be as useful as, like, go to Business Model Canvas and look that up. So I'd use that. I would make heavy use of Wikipedia if I were you. Well, guys, we've used up pretty much an hour. I'm going to have to call it a day right now. And thank you very much for your interest. I really wish you all the best. We hold these things monthly, so feel free to come back in a month and keep us posted on how you're doing. And as always, best wishes. I'm getting your certification this year, so thank you, guys. So Anna, one last question here. Say, what package of Watermark Learning do you suggest for the CBAP? Well, again, depending on your learning style, the ultimate package is to take a CBAP prep class or our anytime learning, because that will give you the 35 hours you need. It'll give you focused training on the BABAC. It will give you access to other tools like 90 days worth of our online study exam, flashcards, study tables, and so forth. That's the ultimate package. You can break those down depending on your budget into smaller chunks. And so our training consultants can help you. If you want to send me in an email, I can forward your name on to them and they could get back to you for that. So Shankar, thank you. I look forward to your email. And Anna, if you want to do that, richard.larson@watermarklearning.com. I will pass it on to one of our training consultants. Thank you, Nancy. I'm glad this is helpful. Please come back again. We like doing these. I like hearing from people, and I like being able to give advice that is meaningful, and hopefully it is. And thank you again, guys, and have a good one. Bye-bye.